We see your hand, you're on the move. Revival's wave is breaking through. Though we are weak, our God is strong. You can't be stopped, you're the Lord of all. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. The veil has been torn, the victory is won. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. Your kingdom comes, the darkness flees. Your glory shines, the world will see. The Son of God, the risen King. The nations shake as your people sing. Come on, nothing can stop. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. The veil has been torn, the victory is won. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. Your glory and your goodness are going now before us. What can stand against? What can stand against your passion for the broken and your heart for every nation? What can stand against? What can stand against your glory and your goodness are going now before us? What can stand against? Come on. What can stand against your passion for the broken and your heart for every nation? What can stand against? What can stand against? Nothing can stop. All you say it. Your goodness, God. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. The veil has been torn, the victory is won. Nothing can stop your goodness. Come on, read out one more time. Nothing can stop. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. The veil has been torn, the victory is won. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. Oh, nothing can stop your goodness. Oh, nothing can stop your goodness. One last time. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. Nothing can stop your goodness. Come on, sing it out. The veil has been torn, the victory is won. Nothing can stop your goodness. Come on, one last time. Nothing can stop. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. The veil has been torn, the victory is won. Nothing can stop your goodness, God. Nothing can stop your goodness. 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 No one can. Nothing can stop your goodness. Last time. Nothing can stop your goodness. God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, every burn is a single fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. So will I. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. Ooh. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you say. If it of salvation. You chased down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Where you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I. I can see your heart a billion different ways. Every precious one, the child you died to save. If you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind. You're the one who never leaves the one behind. You're the one who never leaves the one behind. You're the one who never leaves the one behind. Do it again 100 billion times. So will I. Hallelujah. God, we thank you for this time. Thank you for giving us the breath that we don't deserve, but that you give us anyway to worship you, Lord. I pray that the songs that we're singing will really come into our hearts, Lord, and that we'll just see you for who you truly are, that you really will leave the one. You'll leave the rest for the one, Lord. So we thank you, Lord, that we are the one. We're the one. And we thank you for everything you're doing in our lives. I pray for the rest of this service, that it will bring you glory, and that you'll just open our minds and our hearts to you. It's in Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Thanks. All right. Hello. How's it going? Good. Well, guys, here we are. The last night of summer. Tell me, what are you more, like, in your heart, what are you grieving more deeply at the moment? That tomorrow you have to go back to school, or that tonight is the last night of our In the Beginning Old Testament series? Like, which one do you feel more just like, like if we could spend 10 more weeks studying just the Old Testament, right? No? Okay. You guys are nice. Yeah. So tomorrow's the day, back to school. How many of you started already? A few, yeah, I knew, Austin. Anybody else? Anybody else start already? Okay. And then I'm just curious, this has nothing to do with the message. I'm just curious. What's your general feeling, like scale of 1 to 10, about going back in person tomorrow? 10 being like best day of my life, and 1 being like virtual school forever. 10? How many 10s? Anybody a 10? Anybody feeling a 10 about back in person? Anybody a 1? Like if you could just do school in front of a computer every day for the rest of your life? A few of you. So are the rest of you like 5, somewhere around a 5? You're somewhere in the middle? All right, just curious. I'm just curious. Because it's a big switch, right? How many of you, okay, this is another question. I'm sorry, I'm just curious. How many of you tomorrow are going to a school that probably at this point you've been there like to tour it, but the last time you were in school in person, it was a different school. So if you've changed schools since the last time you went to school in person, raise your hand. Okay, awesome, just curious. So here's the thing. So we go next week, Kyle just told you, we go back to our normal 4:30 to 6:30 middle school, 6:30 to 8:30 high school schedule. That happens next week. And we small groups come back into the mix. We start gearing up for small groups next week. We have just about every single one of our small group leaders like nailed down right now. Like we are so close. I think this is the closest we maybe have ever been to having all of our small group leaders. So I'm really nervous. I'm going to step right. So I'm just going to, okay. So really excited about that. That's great. Here's something that we're going to talk tonight about Esther. We're wrapping up this In the Beginning series with the book of Esther, which should you choose to read what you're assigned this week, which I'm pretty confident at this point that not a single one of you are. But if you were to choose to do that, then you would be wrapping up this In the Beginning thing we've been doing all year with Esther, where we would be reading that book at the end of this week, and that would be the end of it. So how many of you have ever read the book of Esther? Anybody ever read Esther beginning to end? How many of you at least are pretty sure you know the story of Esther? Like, that sounds familiar. You think you might have the high points down. All right, so we're going to wrap that up tonight. And but before we do that, I wanted to talk for a second, because we're going to come back to this idea a couple of times about this idea that we, in a lot of different things in life, we don't use the word victory when it comes to our faith super often. And around here, like that's a bit of like a super Christian, like Christianese, like hallelujah, glory kind of like church word victory. But for tonight, for our purposes tonight, I am going to be talking a little bit about this idea that a vision for something, having a vision for what the future could look like, plus endurance, going the same way over a long period of time, equals victory. That if you have like a really clear vision for where you want to go, and then you just keep putting one foot in front of the other in that direction over a really long period of time, that eventually you will experience some victory in your life. And so everybody just say with me, vision plus endurance equals victory. Okay, just store that away somewhere. We're going to come back to that here in a little bit. And this goes for like all sorts of goals, right? So if you are looking to like if you just replace the word victory with like a goal or something that you have, like if you have a dream for something, that would maybe be another word for vision. And then you have discipline for something, that would maybe be another word for endurance. Then eventually a dream plus a discipline will equal accomplishing whatever the goal is, right? So this would be true of like anything. Like if you have a goal that you want to run a 5K, right? Like you can dream about it, like that sounds like a great idea. And then if you put some endurance to that or some discipline to that, then eventually, more than likely, you'll be able to run a 5K. It might take you an hour, but you'll be able to do it, right? So this will be true of like just about anything in our life where vision plus endurance equals victory. So our focus from the Bible tonight is the entire book of Esther. And it's the story about a young woman whose name is, wait for it, Esther, and she's something else. Like she is not boring. She is about the age of many of you, like particularly if you're in high school right now. She's about your age when this story takes place, and And her life is anything but boring. And so you've got to know, I'm going to tell you kind of the characters, and as we go, we're going to unpack the story. But the story starts with a guy named King Xerxes. And King Xerxes is like not a good dude. He's actually really a pretty bad dude. He's like not a good king. There's really no redeeming qualities about Xerxes. And he is the king of a country called Persia. Now, pause, because I want you to always be able to place where we are in the story and what you know about the biblical narrative, all right? So go back to, remember we had David, and David was the king over the United Kingdom of Israel. And then what happens to the United Kingdom of Israel? It splits. It splits into the northern kingdom called Israel. Someone's been paying attention. And the southern kingdom called Judah. Good job. Okay, so the northern kingdom of Israel, it gets conquered by an empire called the Assyrians. And then, like a couple hundred years later, the southern kingdom of Judah gets conquered by does anybody remember? Babylonians. Very good. I'm so proud of you guys. So they get conquered by the Babylonians. And does anybody remember what happens to most of the people who live in the southern kingdom of Judah? They get taken into captivity. They get exiled. And most of the people that live, particularly like the powerful, all the people who have like wealth and money and resources, and whether it's not like the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, everybody with like knowledge and resources and stuff, like the educated class, plus all of like the ruling class, all of those people in Judah, they all kind of en masse, like a whole big group of them get like taken away in several different ways, but eventually most of them end up in Babylon. Then Babylon gets conquered, and Babylon gets conquered by the Persian Empire. And that's really important to know because eventually it'll be a Persian emperor named Cyrus who will send the Israelites, the Judahites, the Hebrew people, the Jews, will send them back to Israel, to Judah, to the whole area to start to rebuild, to Jerusalem to start to rebuild. So if you were to read this week, you would read the stories of Ezra and Nehemiah, and you would read the stories about Cyrus, the emperor of Persia, sending people back to go rebuild the temple and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And that's the return back to Israel. But in the middle of all of that, we have this other king, Xerxes. And he's the king of Persia. But he's not a good dude, and this is before Cyrus comes and does anything. Maybe it's after. Now that I say that, I don't actually remember whether this happens before or after Cyrus. But there's still a lot of Jews living in Persia at the time of King Xerxes, okay? And he's a bad dude. He has this queen named Vashti, all right? So it's Xerxes and Vashti. They're like the power couple. And Xerxes was known for throwing these big lavish parties, like crazy lavish parties. And like, everybody gets really drunk at these parties. This particular party that we're going to drop in this story lasted for 6 months, okay? 6 months of partying, of drunkenness. And he's got all of his buddies, like all the powerful people in Persia, they've all gathered there to be at the party, and they're there for 6 months. And somewhere in the middle of this 6-month drunk fest, Cyrus says, "Hey, Queen Vashti, why don't you wear your crown and come entertain everybody?" So here's what's implied in that. Hey, Queen Vashti, why don't you wear nothing but your crown and come entertain all my friends with your body? Let's all just look at your nakedness and you can dance for us and put on a little show for all of my drunken friends. Does that sound safe for a woman to do that with a bunch of drunk dudes? No, it does not sound safe. So Queen Vashti is like, yeah, no, I'm absolutely not going to do that. And Xerxes is like, first, remember, he's like drunk. He's been drunk for like 6 months. He's super drunk. And he's now embarrassed in front of all of his buddies who are all also drunk. And so he's like, okay, fine, you're out. Just kicks her out of her home, kicks her out. You're no longer the queen. He strips her of everything, her crown, everything, and kicks her out of his palace. And that's the last we hear of Queen Vashti. We have no idea what happens to Queen Vashti. But then his rulers, he's like, well, now what do? I don't have a queen. And so all of his like counselors and everybody gather around him and is like, how about I got an idea. Here it is. Let's have a beauty pageant. They didn't say that, but that's basically what it is. Let's have a beauty pageant, and all of the virgin women who live in your kingdom can come and hang out for a while, and you can kind of choose which one you think is the prettiest, and she can be your new queen. And so this edict goes out, inviting all of the virgin women, the unmarried virgin women, to come and to live at the palace. And they did 6 months of one kind of beauty treatment and then 6 months of another type of beauty treatment. And at the end of those 6 months, they got one night with the king, which means everything that you think it means. They get one night with the king, and if they don't impress him on their one night with him, then they're out, and they get to go be a part of his harem for the rest of their lives. Sound like fun? No, I don't want to do that either, right? So these are the options that have been laid before these women. So Esther enters the scene now. Esther is a Jewish woman living in Persia, but at this point, people don't necessarily know. The Jews have, for the most part, kind of assimilated in with the people, and so it's not widely known who's Jewish and who's not necessarily. And so she is a beautiful young virgin, and so she gets selected to come and to be a part of this beauty pageant that the king is going to have. And so she does her 6 months of one beauty treatment, does her 6 months of another beauty treatment, and she's talking to. So the women are going in one after another, and they're adorning themselves in gold and jewels and perfume and dresses and all this stuff for their one night with the king to try to impress him with how beautiful they are. And Esther has this eunuch who's been assigned to her. Anybody know what a eunuch is? A eunuch is a guy who has been castrated, either as a boy or as an adult man, and he works and lives in the palace. And the reason why they want eunuchs to take care of all these beautiful women is so that they are not able to sleep with the beautiful women, right? So they're generally really trusted advisors. We see eunuchs other places in Scripture, and they're trusted because they are unable to reproduce. So they have nothing. They can't have their own children, and so there's no So they're trusted advisors, but they pay a very steep price for their trustworthiness and their loyalty, right? So she has this eunuch, and the eunuch says to her, who becomes her friend over the course of this year that she's at the palace. This is a great story so far, right? This is in the Bible, you guys. This is in the Bible. So she has this eunuch friend who's been taking care of her, and he says, listen, I've been seeing these women come in and out, and the king's not impressed with any of them yet. Don't wear a bunch of gold. Don't adorn yourself with a bunch of makeup. Just go in as you are, for who you are. Just be yourself. You're going to knock him off his feet. So she does. She goes in, doesn't put on a bunch of jewelry, doesn't put on a bunch of makeup. She just takes a bath. She smells good. She goes in, and he says, okay, that's it. She wins. She's my new queen. So Esther becomes the queen of the Empire Persia alongside of King Xerxes. Fast forward the story. Esther has an uncle. His name is Mordecai. Mordecai is, he's also Jewish because he's Esther's uncle, and he's hanging out at the city gates in the middle of all of this other stuff that's going on with Esther. He's interested in the affairs of Esther because she is his niece, and she's an orphan. She doesn't have parents, and so he's the one who has been taking care of her whole life. And he's hanging out by the city gates trying to kind of keep an eye on what's going on with Esther during this whole beauty pageant thing. And while he's there, he overhears a plot to have the king killed. And so Mordecai goes to somebody, a guard or somebody, and it's hey, I heard these guys talking about a plot against the king. You should do something about that. And so they investigate. It turns out it's true, and the king's life is saved, and Mordecai becomes a hero. And so the king calls in, so all this happens. Months and months and months and months and months go by. So Esther's the queen. And now King Xerxes can't sleep one night, probably because he's a bad dude and evil, but he can't sleep, okay? And so he decides that he wants to have somebody come and read the history of his kingdom to him, right? That's what I do when I can't sleep, I read, right? So he wants to have the history of his kingdom read to him. And so somebody comes in and starts reading to him, and they read to him the story of Mordecai saving his life. And King Xerxes is wait a second. What did we do for Mordecai after he saved my life? And the guy's I'm looking, nothing. We did nothing for him. Well, we need to fix that, Xerxes says. So he calls his second in command, his chief of staff dude. His name is Haman. He brings Haman in. He's Haman, I need help. There's this guy, and I really want to honor him. What would you do? What would you have me do if I really wanted to honor somebody like like big time honor them. And Haman, because he's really prideful and really not a much better guy than Xerxes, he says, I'll tell you what I would do. I would put him on like a donkey or a horse or something and ride and like have somebody else that you really respect lead him through town, shouting ahead of him, this is what the king does for someone he wants to honor. And like put all these robe on him and jewels and all this stuff. Haman is saying all this thinking that it's him that the king wants to honor. And the King Xerxes is like, brilliant, do that, but you do it, and I want you to do it for this Mordecai dude who saved my life. And Haman is like pissed that he has to do this. He already doesn't like Mordecai, he doesn't like Jews in general, and now he has to lead Mordecai through town saying this is what the king wants to do for someone he wants to honor. He's humiliated in front of his friends, he just feels like an idiot, and so that makes him hate Mordecai even more. So he goes to the king sometime later and says, hey king, Xerxes, did you know that there is a group of people living in your kingdom who don't worship you as their ultimate king? They worship God, Yahweh, their God. They have their own God, and they say that that God is better than you or any of your gods. And they have a whole separate, they don't worship you, they just worship this one God. And Xerxes is like, no, this cannot be. He's like super pissed because he's supposed to be the most important one. And Haman is like, I think we should kill them all. What do you think? And Xerxes is like, deal, let's do it. Kill them all. So he issues an edict that goes out to the entire Persian Empire that says, on this day, you can kill any Jew you want. And just sends his whole entire kingdom to kill on like this certain day, like a certain amount of time from now. Just kill whatever Jews you want to kill. It's fine. Open season on all Jewish people. So that edict goes out. Mordecai gets the edict, and he's like, well, this isn't good. So he goes to Esther. And I want to use this. So at this point, we're in chapter 4 of the book of Esther. And I'm only going to read a little bit of it to you. But basically, Mordecai tells the eunuch who tells Esther, you have to do something. You have to save your people. You're the one that's been placed in proximity to the king who's able to do something. You're a Jew. You have to do something. And Esther's like, you don't understand. The king hasn't called me like to see me. Like they don't share a bed, right? Like she has her own separate quarters, her own separate everything. She's like, you don't understand. The king hasn't called me to come and see him in months. And if I just go into the throne room, I could be beheaded. The way it works is that if I go into the throne room uninvited, if I just show up and come in, and if the king doesn't lift his scepter to say that I can come in, he can have me beheaded on the spot. Like, you don't just go into the throne room of the king. And Mordecai says, so she's like, this is like super risky. I can't just like do this. Here we are. I'm going to read a little bit. In reply, Esther ordered Hathach, that's the eunuch, to tell Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people in his provinces know that there's a single law in a case like this. Any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner courtyard without being called is to be put to death. Only the person to whom the king holds out the gold scepter may live. In my case, I have been called to come to the king for the past 30 days. When they told Mordecai Esther's words, he had them respond to Esther. So now these are Esther's words. These are Mordecai's words back to Esther. Don't think for 1 minute that unlike all the other Jews, you'll come out of this alive simply because you are in the palace. In fact, if you don't speak up at this very important time, relief and rescue will appear for the Jews from another place, but you and your family will die. But who knows? Maybe it was for a moment like this that you came to be a part of the royal family. Don't be so high and mighty that you think you can just lay low, and because the king doesn't know you're a Jew, your life will be spared. Don't think that if you just hang out and play it safe, that it's all going to work out for you while the rest of us get killed. Mark my words, Mordecai says, if you don't act, God will send someone who does, because God is not going to allow God's people to all be slaughtered by the Persians. So God will send someone else to help us if you choose not to do it. But who knows? Maybe you've heard it translated this way. But who knows but that you were sent to the palace for such a time as this? Maybe this exact moment is the reason why you were sent to this place, for this, so that you can save our people. So 3 days later, Esther puts on all of her royal clothes, her royal garments, everything. She puts everything on. She goes to the inner courtyard. and she enters into the throne room, and she bows down on the floor, and she grovels, and she's weeping, and she begs for the king's mercy, and then she waits. And she waits. And the king lifts his golden scepter and says, "Yes, my queen, what can I do for you?" So she stands up and she says, "I'd like to invite you to a banquet. You and Haman, your second in command dude. Come to a banquet over at my place, my side of the palace. That's all you want? That's all I want." Okay. So like the next day, they have this big banquet, and Esther throws this big banquet for Haman and for the king, and the king is like, he's eating, and he's like reveling at how beautiful his wife is and all this stuff, and Haman is like feeling real good about himself because he's at this like special, like just the king and the queen and him dinner. And the king says, "What do you want, Esther? Up to half my kingdom. Ask for it and I will give it to you." And Esther says, "Come to another banquet tomorrow. You and Haman, that's all I want. Just come to another banquet tomorrow." And he's like, "Okay." So the next day, they come back to another banquet, Haman and the king. And at this point, Haman has had a gallows set up. Like he's like the day when all of the Jews are going to get killed is fast approaching. And so he's like getting ready. He's told his family about how great it is that he's at this special banquet with the king and the queen. And while he's at this special banquet with the king and the queen, he's having these gallows prepared to hang Mordecai on for the day when he finally gets to kill him. And he is feeling real good about life. And he enters into the banquet hall, and they start eating. And the king says, "Esther, tell me, half my kingdom, what do you want? It's yours." And Esther says, I'm going to read it to you. Hang on. I got a little ahead of myself here. In chapter 7. Nope, chapter 6. Nope, chapter 7. Sorry, I should have had it written down. If I please the king, and if the king wishes, give me my life. That's my wish. And the lives of my people too. That's my desire. We have been sold, I and my people, to be wiped out, killed, and destroyed. If we simply had been sold as male and female slaves, I would have said nothing, but no enemy can compensate the king for this kind of damage. And King Xerxes said to the queen Esther, "Who is this person and where is he? Who would dare do such a thing?" Esther replied, "A man who hates an enemy, this wicked Haman." Haman was overcome with terror in the presence of the king and queen. Furious, the king got up and left the banquet for the palace garden. But Haman stood up to beg Queen Esther for his life. He saw clearly that the king's mood meant a bad end for him. The king returned from the palace garden to the banquet room just as Haman was kneeling on the couch where Esther was reclining. "Will you even molest the queen while I am in the house?" the king said. The words had barely left the king's mouth before covering Haman's face with dread. So one of the eunuchs shows up and says, "Hey, by the way, this dude had a gallows made for Mordecai out there. Why don't we hang him on it?" And the king says, "Do it." So Haman and, unfortunately, his entire family all get hung on the gallows. They all get killed because of what Haman had done to the Jews. "Impale him on it," the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the very pole that he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger went away. Except we still have this edict. We still have this edict that says that any Persian can kill any Jew. So we've got to do something about that. Esther is still the only one who can act. So she decides to go before the king again. Again, risking her life. Because again, if the king isn't having it, he can order her to be killed on the spot. So Esther goes before the king a second time. And she bowed at his feet, wept, and begged him to treat her kindly. She wanted him to overturn the evil plot of Haman the Agagite, his secret plan directed against the Jews. The king held out the gold scepter to Esther, and she got up and stood before him. She said, "If the king wishes, and if I please him, that is, if the idea seems right to the king, if he still sees me as a good person, then have people write something to call back the order that put into effect the plan of Haman that he wrote to destroy the Jews in all the royal provinces." And so the king, with Esther, they write a new edict that goes out that basically says, because of like, I don't know, it seems to me that if he's the king, he can do whatever he wants. But apparently the way that the law works is that he can't just reverse it. Like he can't just undo the edict he sent out before. So instead he has to write a new edict that says, if you attempt to kill a Jew on this day, the Jew can fight back and kill you in return with no repercussions. And so it gave the Jews the right to defend themselves on that day. And so the day comes, and Jews don't get killed. The Jewish people now celebrate that as the festival of Purim because they were supposed to be wiped off the face of the earth, and instead God saves them from this massive genocide. And it's on the 13th day of the 12th month that the king's order and his law were to be enforced, and instead it doesn't happen. Mordecai ends up being elevated to second in command in King Xerxes' kingdom. Xerxes doesn't suddenly become a good guy, but that's the end of the story. All right here. Told you what was in. I didn't make any of it up. It's kind of a crazy story, right? How many of you were like, wow, I don't think I've heard that before? Anybody? A few of you. A few of you who were like, or maybe you were like, that is not the version of it that I heard when I was in Sunday school. That is probably also true. So I want to talk a little bit, now that I've told you the story of Queen Esther and read a little bit of it to you, I want to just make a couple of points about this. Esther, when she's elevated as a queen, she now is like in a sphere of influence with the king. The king is within her assumed sphere of influence. And every single one of you, I realize that you and your people are not facing genocide in the coming days, but you are starting a new school year. And so as we are like on the brink, like on the cusp of a new school year, we're going to try and take the story of Esther and lay it over top of a new school year. So you do have a sphere of influence of people that you are around, people that Jesus has given you influence over. And Jesus gives all of us people that we influence either positively or negatively for Christ. And how you use that influence helps determine what kind of faith you will have. Like if your faith is just a casual faith, if it's like a Sunday faith, but it really doesn't impact your Monday through Saturday life, then your faith probably is pretty boring. You are probably pretty bored by the whole idea of like a relationship with Jesus, of Christianity, of whatever you want to call it, if you have a Sunday faith, but not really a Monday through Saturday faith. If your faith is casual, then your Christianity may be boring. As we launch this year, Jesus wants to remind all of us that we have a sphere of influence and we have to decide if we're going to use it positively with those around us. If we're going to we have a choice to make, to use our sphere of influence in a positive way or in a negative way. Are we going to be a positive influence for Jesus for the people around us, or are we going to be a negative person for Jesus, influencer for Jesus for the people around us? And here's the reality. If you don't make the decision to be positive with your sphere of influence, then probably it's going to go negative, right? Like no decision is still a decision when it comes to your sphere of influence and how you live your life for Jesus. There's this quote from one of my absolute favorites. Her name is Jeannie Mayo. And she says this: anything you compromise to gain, you will eventually lose. Anything you compromise to gain, you will eventually lose. For example, if at school you compromise in order to gain popularity, you will eventually lose the popularity. Okay? If you compromise in order to gain a friend, you will eventually lose the friend. If you compromise to gain a relationship, you will eventually lose the relationship. Anything you compromise to gain, you will eventually lose. So here's Esther. She's like the prom queen, right? She's like top of the world. She's it in the story. And the king doesn't know she's Jewish. And so Mordecai comes to her and says, you have to do something. And Esther is like, heck no, I don't have to do something. I don't want to lose my life. Because she knew that Xerxes doesn't know she's Jewish, doesn't know that she isn't a Persian like everyone else. And she knows that if he gets ticked, then she's dead. So really high risk, right? Really high risk for maybe or maybe not any reward. But anything you compromise to gain, you will eventually lose. She wasn't 100% honest with the king about her being Jewish when she became queen. She maybe made a compromise in that way. And anything you compromise to gain, you will eventually lose. And so Mordecai gives Esther this really great advice that maybe it was for a moment just like this one that you came to be a part of the royal family. And that sounds lovely. But she's the one who, odds are, isn't going to survive the moment, the time such as this, right? She's also the one in the position to do something about it. And the king is now in her sphere of influence. So she has to decide, what is she going to do in this moment? And so do we. Maybe not in order to save millions of lives. Maybe not in order to save the lives of your family or your people group. But there are a million little ways that you can choose to be an instrument of God this year or not. You can choose to speak up when you see something that's not supposed to be happening or not. You can choose to befriend somebody who desperately needs a friend or not. You can choose to play fair, to do schoolwork fair, to be fair or not. You can choose to invite someone to church or not. You can choose to pray or not. You can choose to live your life on Monday through Saturday the way you live your life on Sunday or not. You can choose to love people the way that Jesus loves people or not. Now listen, what Mordecai said about Esther is the same as the people and situations in your sphere of influence. If you don't speak up, if you choose to just be a casual Christian, if you choose to just be a Sunday Christian and to leave that on Sundays and to go about the rest of your business, then I'm not saying that everybody in your sphere of influence is going to be lost forever, right? Because mark my words, God will send somebody. God will send somebody to tell them about the redemptive power of Jesus. God will send somebody to tell them that they were created on purpose, for a purpose, that nothing about them is a mistake, and that they have a calling and a purpose in this life, right? God will send somebody to declare that message to them. If you don't speak up and act and pray and love the way that your faith informs you to, then God will use someone else to accomplish God's purposes. But the reason that many of us have a boring Christianity, have a boring faith, is because we play it way too safe. It's because we would really rather nobody know about this Jesus thing that we ascribe to. We would really rather keep church as a Sunday night thing. In fact, it's even okay if people know that we go to church every once in a while, but we don't really want anyone to know that the love of Jesus has transformed our lives in any way. We don't really want anyone to know that we have chosen to live our lives in a certain direction, that we believe in the redemptive power of God and are doing our best to live in the ways of Jesus. And so the reason that many of us have a boring Christianity is because we have chosen to play it way too safe. And every single victory in your life, there's that word again, every single time that vision plus endurance equals victory, every victory in your life is going to involve some sort of a Haman. Something's going to come against you. Every time you set your sights on a new dream, on a new goal, you have a new vision and you're determined to walk that out in endurance so that you can achieve some sort of a victory. Every single time you do that, a Haman is going to come in and try to knock you out of the game. Something will happen. I was talking to a student. We've got a bunch of students who are getting baptized. And every single time students get baptized, something comes along right afterwards to try to knock them out of the game. Because victories always come with risk, a resulting risk that you have to be willing to take. Every victory in your life will involve some sort of Haman and a resulting risk that you have to be willing to take to achieve the victory that God's put before you. Haman was the number 2 guy in the kingdom. He hated the Jews big time. He was determined to destroy them. And so he put this plot to kill all the Jews inside the king's head. And here's just a side note. Sometimes the Hamans in your life, some people act like they hate you. And it's because they're actually really jealous of you. Because that was the deal with Haman, right? He hates Mordecai because he's jealous of Mordecai because Mordecai got led around on this horse and said that the king wanted to honor him and all that, right? He was seething with jealousy in that moment. Some people hate you because they're so insecure in themselves that they can take you out to make themselves feel better. So it's not always when a Haman comes into your life, when you're on a path and a Haman comes in to try to knock you out, sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's not a person. I understand that, but sometimes it's a person. And when that happens, it feels like they hate you, but hate is actually not a primary emotion. It's at least a secondary emotion, maybe a third emotion. And the jealousy or the insecurity, that's the thing that's really at the root of whatever that thing is. So people act like they dislike you, and it's because they're secure. It's because they're jealous of you. So what or who is your Haman? What is your risk that you have to be willing to take if you're going to be who God's calling you to be, if you're going to have the victory that you are hoping to have this coming school year? If you really make this year a significant God year for you, not perfect, I know none of you are perfect, I know you're gonna make mistakes, but if you say this year, I wanna live it at just a different level, from the year before, I just wanna level up in the way that I live for Jesus, what's the risk factor? What's it gonna be for you? Where's the Haman? Because listen, it doesn't take much risk to put up a performative post on Instagram, right? It doesn't take much risk for you to comment on social media about whatever the global issue or the cultural issue of the day is. That doesn't take a whole lot of risk. But to actually show up with your body to serve somebody or to help somebody or to actually put your actual dollars, because some of you I know have jobs, you have dollars, put your dollars where those things are, or for you to say, no, that joke's not funny, or for you to say, actually, I don't think that we should talk about people that way. For you to put your body there, that's going to take some risk for some of you. It does take risk to do some of those things. So fast forward, because Esther goes before the king, and he holds out her scepter to her, and she rewrites this plot. And you might think, because she's like the only one who can do anything about this. And you might feel sometimes like you're all on your own in this. Like this idea that you might level up your faith, you maybe sometimes feel like you're all on your own trying to make that happen. Like you're the only one who's trying to level up in your faith. You're the only one who's trying to act this way. Or maybe you're the only one who's going to say the joke's not funny. Or you're the only one who's going to say we don't talk about people that way. Or you're the only one who's going to put your body where it needs to be in order to stop something from happening in some way. But the King of the universe sees that. And I want you to just grab that vision in your mind that the King of the universe holds out God's scepter to you to say you are not alone in this. I stand with you in your desire, in your attempt, in your willingness to declare me to other people, in your willingness to love other people the way that I love, that you might feel like you're all by yourself, but I am all the way in with you on that. You take a risk. You step out in faith to level up in how you live out your faith and watch how God will extend God's favor. Probably not in the ways that you expect. If there is one thing I have learned, many things I have learned in my life, but one thing I have learned in my life is